Welcome back to Kelly's Corner. How's everyone doing? Good, I hope. It's a little bit rainy here in Memphis metro area. It's rained here since Monday, and I just saw on the internet that the state house in my home state in Montgomery got a substantial amount of rain earlier this afternoon, and it's flooded. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I wanted to jump on here and just kind of talk for a few minutes. Today's a notable day for me, and I wanted to acknowledge that because I feel that our testimonies of the things that God has brought us through and helped us and allowed us to overcome, they're not so much for us as they are for other people. Because we don't know from day to day the people that we come into contact with who might need our story, who might need our encouragement that, hey, they survived what I'm going through or something similar to what I'm going through, or that my child is going through or my parent is going through. We don't know who those people are most of the time. Sometimes we might, but we don't always. And so we should share our stories and the testimonies and the things that God has brought us through and allowed us to overcome to help others. And so I've always kind of believed that that's what they're for. They're not for us to keep to ourselves. They're for others. Yeah, they serve their purpose in our life. But going forward, it's our job to to not keep them to ourselves. And so that's kind of what I want to do with this episode. Is I want to celebrate a time period in my life for sure, because it deserves being celebrated. But I also want to recognize the fact that I'm here and can celebrate it, because of God's goodness and His mercy in my life, and that He graciously allowed me the opportunity to live. 34 years ago, in 1992, I was a 6-year-old kid. I was in kindergarten in May of that year. I was getting ready to finish kindergarten, and at the beginning of May, I started to get kind of sick, and I remember the most random details about those days and this time period in my life that I'm going to share. Maybe I remember some of it because of the trauma that occurred, and I do remember some traumatic events, and I'll talk about those. But the majority of what I remember about those days are completely random, just off the wall. Why would anybody even have put that in their mind? Leave it to me, right? But at the beginning of May, I started to get kind of sick. I was born with a condition called hydrocephalus. I've talked about this before on the podcast in an earlier episode, maybe even last year on this day, because I commemorate this day every single year. Somehow I find some way to celebrate it and commemorate it, because it's kind of like a second birthday to me, in a way. And so I want to make sure to acknowledge the day and to celebrate every single year, because you never know what the next year might hold. But I was born with a condition called hydrocephalus, and had a shunt, which is basically a little piece of plastic that pumps the fluid from my brain, because it doesn't drain properly, down my spinal column into my abdomen, and then it's connected to a blood vessel there, and it filters into my bloodstream and allows me to live. It keeps the fluid from building up on my brain. And so I had a shunt placed as a baby, and that shunt worked fine for about 6 years. And when I was 6, in May of 1992, the shunt that I had placed as a baby showed signs of malfunctioning, of going bad. And I can remember, when it first started happening, I guess it would have been about May the 4th, 1992. We were at my great-grandmother's house, and I can see myself, because I have a photographic eidetic memory, I can see myself laying on her couch. Well, all I wanted to do was sleep, and was very lethargic, and that's a sign. Well, then that night, I started complaining of a headache, a bad headache, which is the biggest sign, because the pressure's starting to build up on your brain, and it's causing your head to hurt. And so I can see my parents with the 6-year-old kid who's complaining of a headache. And I don't know if they didn't make children's Tylenol back then, or if they didn't think it was going to be strong enough to help me, or if we were out, or what the situation was. But I remember, and I can see vividly in my mind, that they crunched up a Tylenol capsule and put it in a spoon in water to get me to take it, to help me take it, to help maybe hopefully help ease the headache. Well, I took it, and as soon as I took it, I threw it right back up, which I don't know if that was as much as of the being nasty because it was in water, or if throwing up is a symptom of a shunt malfunction, and it is. So, I mean, it was kind of could have gone either way type situation. Well, I finally got back to bed, and the next morning, I went to school, and, my parents called the pediatrician to find out, to see if they thought what was going on was really what what was happening, because it had been 6 years since I needed a shunt revision, and so the pediatrician told them, you probably need to take her to Children's, get her checked out or whatever. So my parents, I remember just like it was yesterday. I can see it in my head, checking me out of school to take me over to Children's. They'd made me a little bed in the back of the car, like with a pillow and a blanket and stuff, so that I could lay down while we were on the car ride over to Birmingham, to Children's Hospital. And I remember so many vivid things about this period of time in my life. But the one thing that I don't remember, that I don't have any recollection of, and whether it was never there, or I blocked it out, or whatever, because of my memory, I really do not think that I had any fear. I do not remember at all being fearful this entire time. And maybe that was because I was 6 years old and didn't understand, because there was a lot going on to me and happening to me that I did not understand. And I will admit to you that I didn't. As a 40-year-old person now, I fully understand what was going on with me, and I fully comprehend the fact that I could have died. But as a 6-year-old, I didn't. And a lot of credit to that, I guess, goes to my parents, because being in a hospital, it is a scary situation for anybody, much less a 6-year-old kid. But I don't ever remember being fearful. And I don't think I was fearful because they at least tried to show that they weren't fearful, that they knew everything was going to be all right, and that I had nothing to worry about. So I want to be upfront about that. Maybe I was fearful, but I don't remember that. I have no recollection of it. But we rode over to Children's Hospital, and on the way over, we had talked about what I was going to do on the way home. And one of the things I said that I wanted to do was I wanted to go eat at Cracker Barrel. Because at that time, there was not a Cracker Barrel in my town. And we passed the only Cracker Barrel that I know of in remotely close to where I lived at the time, on the way to the hospital. And so I said I wanted to go eat at Cracker Barrel. Little did I know it was not going to be that same day. My parents did keep their word, and after I was released from the hospital and kind of got better, in fact, I think it was after we went back for the recheck after the surgery, like for the checkup appointment or whatever, we stopped at Cracker Barrel on the way home. So they did take me to Cracker Barrel after the fact. But anyway, so we get to the hospital and they start running some tests and end up admitting me, obviously. And as a 6-year-old kid, I don't really understand what being admitted to the hospital is and all of this, what any of it means. But like I said, I can tell you the most vivid, random stuff. But probably the most traumatic event that I remember in this whole ordeal that I went through as a 6-year-old, I remember, I don't know if it was before I had been admitted or if we were still down in the ER, but I was having all these kind of tests ran on me because as a 6-year-old, I'm not thinking about, now you're just a patient in the ER and now you're a patient at the hospital. I was just there and I didn't feel good. But I remember being there and them putting me on this bed and laying me face down. And they shaved part of my hair off the back of my head. And they put this like glue stuff on me. I now know that it was like antiseptic iodine stuff to get rid of germs. And then they literally, I can visualize this happening to me. Several nurses, and I don't know if they were doctors or medical personnel or whoever they were, literally held me down to stick a needle in the back of my head to draw fluid off of my head to make it to where I could survive the night. That wasn't as much fluid, to kind of help me to get to the point where I could have surgery the next day, because they couldn't do the surgery that night. I think it was because the surgeon that was going to do the surgery had to be flown in from Atlanta. I know he came from the hospital in Atlanta, and I think he had to be flown in and wouldn't get there until late. And so they just decided to do the surgery the next morning, like first thing in the morning, do the surgery instead of that night. So they drew the fluid off so that I could make it to surgery to kind of make me a little more comfortable, and take the pressure off of my brain. Because, with the shunt malfunction, there's nothing, the pressure just in the fluid just kind of keeps continuing to build. And so they drew enough fluid off to buy a little time, I guess. So anyway, I get admitted to the hospital. They send me up to my room, and my grandparents are coming. And I'd not really had anything to eat all day because I'd been sick. And so they were going to bring me a Happy Meal. Keep in mind I'm 6. 6-year-olds like Happy Meals. My nephews love Happy Meals. So, what kid doesn't, I guess. So, they were going to bring me a Happy Meal. Well, they get to the hospital, there's only one visitor's pass left. And so, I don't know why they didn't just open a new pad of visitors' passes, but they didn't. And so they told my grandparents that only one of them could come up at a time, and then they could kind of switch off, and then kind of take turns coming to see me. So My grandfather came up first, my pop, my dad's dad. Love my pop. He's the best. But he came up, and my parents got permission from the nurse to let me go down into the lobby area and eat. That way I could visit with both of my grandparents together, since there was only one visitor's pass. The catch was, in order to let me do this, I had to agree to let them draw some blood. Now, keep in mind that they had just, not too terribly long ago in the past, had stuck that big old needle in the back of my head, so I'm traumatized. Well, they assured me that it wasn't going to hurt as bad as that, and they were right, it didn't. I mean, it's still, as a 6-year-old kid, any kind of needle hurts, but it was not as bad or as traumatic as that. So they used a butterfly needle to take some blood, I guess to run some more tests on my blood. I was poked and prodded more in those days, that hospital stay, that I think I've ever been in my entire life. But I can see, again, very vivid memories of getting in my pop's lap and him holding me while they took blood. Well, then once the blood was taken, true to their word, they let me go down in the lobby for a little while, eat my Happy Meal, visit with my grandparents. And then when my grandparents left, we came back up to my room and I went to bed. And my dad had mentioned the word operation, but as a 6-year-old, I didn't know what that meant. Like, I had no idea that I was going into, have what surgery was the next day. But when I woke up the next morning, several family members were there, because that's what my family does. At least my dad's family, we're very close, and my aunts were there, and my grandparents came back. My dad, obviously, of course, came back, for surgery, and another random funny thing I remember, they had given me some red liquid in a syringe, like to take by mouth, of some kind of medicine. I have no idea what it was. It may have been to calm the nerves that I was not really experiencing, because I didn't really understand what was going on. I don't know. It was some kind of red medicine. That's all I remember. Anyway, I took it on an empty stomach because I had not had anything to eat all day, because I was about to have surgery. And threw it up on my dad. And why I remember that, I don't know, but that just it was funny. And I have no idea what he did about getting an extra shirt, because I threw it all up all over down his shirt. And I thought I was going to be in trouble, but I was not, obviously. He knew I was sick and didn't do it on purpose, and you can't really say much to a kid who's about to have major brain surgery, I guess. But so it came time for surgery. They came to get me. My family, that were there, told me bye, and that they loved me. And we had prayer, and they let my parents walk with me from my room down to the operating room, to the doors of the operating room. And I remember, them being at the doors of the operating room and, telling me bye, and, that they love me and all of that. And then, that they would be waiting when I was done. Sorry, getting a little bit emotional. I can usually tell this story and be fine. But that they wheeled me into surgery, and has some more vivid, random stuff that I remember. They wheeled me into surgery, and I was looking up at the above where I was laying for the surgery, and the big light that they have in operating rooms, with little things sticking out of it. On the tip of the little thing sticking out of the big light, at least in 1992, at Children's Hospital of Alabama in Birmingham, there was a sticker of Kermit the Frog on the very tip of that huge light. Again, why I remember that, I don't know, but I do. And so I went to sleep because of the medicine, looking at Kermit the Frog. And I mean, to this day, I can still see Kermit the Frog if I think about it. The anesthesiologist is something else I remember very randomly, very vividly. Keep in mind, I'm 6. I was about to be finished with kindergarten. And the anesthesiologist tells me to count backwards from 100. And the nurse looks at him and says, "She's only 6, man." And he's, "Oh, well, can you count backwards from 10? And I don't remember uttering a single number. Like I said, all I remember is looking at Kermit the Frog and going to sleep. And then woke up. I don't know how much time the surgery took or how much time had passed. But it woke up. I remember waking up in the recovery room, and seeing my dad. I don't remember seeing my mom, but I remember seeing my dad. And I asked my dad if he would go get my Aunt Judy, who had been there before the surgery. And he said that he would. And by the time he came back, I had already gone back into sleep. Like, I'd already lost consciousness again, and dozed back off. But I remember at some point, after having dozed back off, I remember kind of waking up, but not really waking up enough to hear my family, several members of my family, and I was not coherent enough to recognize the voice to be able to tell you who it was, but I remember hearing several members of my family standing around my bed in the recovery room, praying for me. I've mentioned on this show multiple times that my families were Christians, and it goes back to my birth story as to how powerful we believe prayer is, and the impact that it can have on a person. And so it made perfect sense that in that kind of situation, in that moment, that they would turn to prayer. So I eventually woke up in the room. People was in the hospital for several days, and relatives, family members came to see me and visited, and brought all kind of toys and gifts, because I'm a kid who just had major surgery. There's a photo that I've seen several times over the last couple of weeks on the internet of Ronald and Nancy Reagan after he had some kind of brain surgery situation, and they only shaved half of his head, and so he's got half of a head of hair. And I commented on X the other day that I was so thankful that when I had brain surgery, they shaved my entire head. I may not have been thankful for that at the time, but I'm thankful for it now, because it would have looked even worse with half of a head of hair instead of none. And I, as a girl and as a kid, and then growing up into a teenager, the scars that I have on my head from the surgery, and the scars that I have on my stomach from the surgery, from where they inserted the tubing and stuff, they bothered me, but now, as an adult, having known and realizing what God brought me through, those scars are special. They signify God's goodness and His mercy and His grace and His healing. And most shunts last 2 years, and at the most, mine's lasted 34. That's special to me, and that's something only God could do. I realize I'm very aware that at any moment I could need another revision, but I don't today. Today's a good anniversary. Today's a happy anniversary. Lord willing, we'll next year at this time we'll be talking about 35. But no matter what you're going through, God can use your story for good. And He promises as Christians that everything that we go through that He will use for good. And I don't know who or what needs to hear my story, but the overarching theme of my story is that God is good. And even in the bad times and the hard times, He's still good. And He 34 years ago lined my path with exactly what and who I needed to make it a successful operation, a successful surgery. And for that I'm thankful. I'm thankful for every single day of the last 34 years that He's given me, of life, of the life of my shunt. And just to be able to sit here 34 years later and look back and remember some of the things that I remember about those days and the recovery that I had. And there are still cards that my parents have put up from the kindergarten class, both classes of kindergartners at my kindergarten school, at school. My classmates, they had made me get well cards. And one in particular, my friend Landon, loved Ninja Turtles. I loved Ninja Turtles too. And he drew me a Ninja Turtle get well card. And that one's special to me. And then, a few weeks after my surgery, there's a picture of me when my hair's kind of started to come back. It's not grown in much, but I'm not, cue ball bald. Like, you can still see that there is, you can see there's no hair, but you can see that it's starting to kind of start to grow back. Like it's sprouting up out of the follicles, I guess. But I'm holding a flower, a rose, and he and his mom had brought me flowers. And that's one of 2 photos that I know of where I don't have any hair. But not a lot of pictures were taken of me. For probably the next year, because of my hair situation. And that's okay. But those scars, they're a testimony. They're part of my testimony. And they speak to the goodness of God and, what He's brought me through. It's a visible testimony, I guess. But yeah, so I just wanted to jump on here and recognize my 34th anniversary, or 34th shunt anniversary, I guess, if you will. But I hope everybody has a great week. And I don't know about you, where you're at, but I know that I'm sick of the rain, and I hope you're dry wherever it is you're at, or you will be dry soon. And normally on this podcast I talk about history, and today I got to talk about a little bit of my history and a little bit of my story. Lord willing, a year from now, we'll be talking about the 35th anniversary of my shunt. But I hope you have a great night, and we'll talk at you soon.